When we're flying IFR, we don't need to be cleared into various classes of airspace, so our thinking about that airspace is a bit different than when we're VFR. The IFR Enroute chart bears that out in depicting airspace. For comparison, here's the VFR sectional of the Boston area. The sectional chart has detailed contours of the Bravo airspace around Logan Airport, both the vertical and lateral dimensions. This makes sense since as VFR flights we want to know where to avoid Bravo airspace if we didn't have the clearance. But here's how the same Bravo airspace looks on the low Enroute chart. As you can see, it's just one big blue circle with a solid blue outline. Why the lack of detail in the IFR chart? Well, when we're IFR, we have no need to be cleared into Bravo airspace. If our route was filed through Bravo or ATC gave us radar vectors through the airspace, that's all we'd need, so there's no need to worry about busting airspace like this when we're IFR. The same principle applies in Charlie airspace as well. Here's Bradley Airport in Hartford. It's the same blue circle, only this time the blue line is dashed instead of solid. Here's the familiar two-tiered upside-down cake at Charlie airspace on the sectional. There's also no notice on the low Enroute chart to contact Yankee approach within 20 miles, again since we'd already be talking to ATC on an IFR flight. The low Enroute chart does also add a letter denoting the airport here is in Class C airspace. You don't find that with the Bravo airports. Moving down, we'll look at Class D airspace. This one in Oxford, Connecticut is tough to see. The airport symbol is the same as any of the other airports on the chart here. The only clue we have that this is a towered Delta airport instead of an untowered E or G airport is that the airport info has a letter D here. There's no airspace depicted like in the sectional with a blue segmented circle. What about Class E airspace? Class E airspace is basically all the white parts of the chart that you see. It's almost everywhere. Class E for everywhere, right? Outside of the B, C, and D airspace that we've talked about, Class E usually starts at 700 or 1200 feet AGL and goes up from there. Class G lies below that. There are exceptions where the G airspace goes up above those low limits. If you search enough out west, you'll find the last of a dying breed, Class G airspace that goes from the surface all the way up to 14,500 MSL. They're a lot easier to spot on these Enroute charts as these tan boxes. In these areas around Dillon Airport, the Class G airspace starts at the surface and goes all the way up to 14,500 MSL. This is uncontrolled airspace. Even flying under IFR, we have no requirement to contact ATC within Class G airspace. Flying in the clouds and mountainous terrain without talking to anyone? It's no wonder these areas are few and far between. The white areas outside of there are the more conventional Class G up to 1200 AGL and Class E above that. Moving into special use airspace, we can have a look at the Jacksonville area for many of the zones we're looking for. Starting with prohibited areas, marked by the letter P and a number. There aren't many of these. This one is protecting a submarine facility, and even under IFR we can't go through this airspace. Here are restricted areas noted with the letter R and a number. We can go through these as long as the controlling facility allows it, but it's good to see these on a chart so we could plan our flights around them in case we don't get cleared through. Similar to the restricted areas are the warning areas that lie off the coastline. Here's warning area 136 Bravo. Military training routes are also depicted on the low Enroute chart. This is a visual route, and instrument routes are found elsewhere as well. Enroute charts are concerned with communications geared towards IFR flight. When you're in the Enroute portion of an IFR flight, and you're outside the terminal areas around large airports, or you're up in the flight levels, you'll be talking to one of these Air Route Traffic Control Centers, or RTACs. Each RTAC covers a large area and is called a center. These are the areas for Washington Center, New York Center, and Cleveland Center. The Enroute chart shows the boundary between centers' airspace. Here, this zipper line depicts the end of the Washington Center's airspace, where it intersects both Cleveland and New York. The chart also lists frequencies for the centers. In this area, Washington Center would be reached through the Hagerstown site on 134.15, and New York Center, the Big Flat site, would be reached on 132.2. Now, these sites are remote outlets that are connected to the RTACs, which could be hundreds of miles away by landline or microwave connection. Now, we know from looking at altitudes that the MEA minimum en route altitude guarantees us signal coverage along the entire route of flight. However, in some rare instances, there might be a gap in coverage along a segment of the route, and that's where an MEA gap will be called out, like this on the chart here. Even at the MEA of 13,000 feet, we may not be able to receive signal to navigate along this Victor airway. Now, most IFR flights we can usually expect to be in radar contact with air traffic control. However, this isn't a requirement for IFR flight in a lot of the en route environment. We could have a faulty transponder, or ATC's ground radar may not pick us up for whatever reason. When that's the case, we have to make position reports to ATC, and those need to happen at certain points. Here's Victor 8 between the Grand Junction and Hanksville VORs. Those symbols are filled in black, which means that these are compulsory reporting points. Without radar coverage on our flight, we need to make position, altitude, and time reports over these points. Here's how it works if we're flying westbound on the airway. When we're over the VOR, we tell ATC, Cessna 6 Papa Victor over Grand Junction at 10,500 at 1820 Zulu. The Zusco fix isn't colored in black, so no need to report there or at all until we reach the next compulsory reporting point, which is the Hanksville VOR. Let's look at a few more odd items on the en route chart. Here's the Grand Canyon. You may know that the Grand Canyon is inside a Special Flight Rules Area, or SFRA, which is bounded by this blue boxed line, which looks similar on both the sectional and en route charts. You'd have to look at the regs for further details. Basically, there are flight-free zones over the canyon and a general aviation corridor to get across. Over on the west side of the SFRA here is an interesting symbol. This dotted line depicts where the time zones change. This is the changeover point from the Mountain Time Zone on the east side to the Pacific Time Zone on the west side. Finally, here's a zigzag through Victor 170 across Lake Michigan. It means that this is an unusable segment of the airway. You shouldn't add this into your flight plan, and ATC shouldn't assign you this portion of the airway, as it's not in use. So this covers airspace in some odd areas of the en route chart. We've covered a lot on these charts in the past few videos, including how airways work and all the minimum altitudes. We'll come back to en route charts from time to time, but by now you should be well versed in all of the symbols on them. If this was helpful, please click subscribe so that you could stay up to date on every new training video coming out each Tuesday and Friday, and get access to posts and articles on the community page that'll take your training even further. It just takes one click, and it's so worth it.